It's the longest running American animated sitcom, so get ready for a big video. Today we're heading to Springfield. This is Every Simpsons Character, good to evil.
Reversal, clinch, I say.
As usual, we're going to start with the most pure-hearted residents of Springfield and work our way down the morality spectrum. While basically nobody in a 30-plus season show can be perfect, these characters are still kind enough to wind up in the good. To start, we're going to give the pets of the Simpson household some appreciation, so our gold medal of good goes to Snowball the Second. While she's only one of several cats the Simpsons have owned through the years, she's for sure the most memorable. Sure, she might not have any dialogue, nor really any particularly striking character traits, but we place her at the top spot for two reasons. One, her bravery in saving Homer's life from a burning treehouse in Old Yeller Belly. Most cats are terrified when they're stuck in a tree, understandably so. So for Snowball the Second to have rescued Homer at great risk to her own safety speaks a lot to just how brave this little cat is. Seriously, it's unlikely that the average human could carry Homer unless they're as jacked as Nettie, much less a little cat. As for the second reason, well, honestly, we just don't have anything negative to say about her, which in Springfield is quite the achievement. The runner-up also doesn't have much in the way of negative traits. Santa's little helper is a good boy in every sense of the phrase. In the first episode of the full series, he wins Homer and Bart over with that good old-fashioned dog charm, and after being thrown out by his sleazy owner, is just happy to have a new family to stay with. As for why he's beneath good old Snowball 2, in the very same episode where she saves Homer from a fire, Santa's little helper flees the scene.
I'm your pal, I took you for a walk once.
While we won't really take points away from him for this, since we certainly wouldn't expect such a small dog to run towards a fire, we still can't possibly call him better than a pet who was willing to do so. Now, before we get to good old Nedward Flanders, it's time to talk about his creepy little offspring, Rod and Todd. These two have all the good characteristics of their parents without any of the bad ones to tarnish their reputation. Rod and Todd are genuinely nice kids, and even into adulthood, they've still retained their morality, taking care of Ned into his old age when he goes blind due to loss of eyeballs. With their strong Christian morals, we're sure they won't have any problem sharing the bronze medal of good. Landing just outside of the top three is Ralph Wiggum, Springfield's least intelligent resident, but one of its most endearing.
I'm taking care of this goldfish.
Once again, we can't really say anything overly negative about Ralph. He's a total sweetheart who just wants to make friends and have fun. When anyone shows kindness to Ralph, he returns it tenfold, seen most prominently during his time pining after Lisa, even going as far as to get her tickets to Krusty the Clown's 29th anniversary show. That said, if we had to pinpoint why he's outside of the podium, it'd be his incompetence. Ralph is never malicious, but he's often reckless, and in the future, when he becomes a police officer with numerous clones of himself, this could definitely lead to some trouble. Again, it's no moral dilemma, but it's the closest anyone has come to actually causing trouble so far. Still, Ralph is a pure kid, and he definitely deserves a high spot on our list. It's time to say hi diddly ho to our next neighborino, Ned Flanders. While we knew for certain Ned would be on the higher end of our list, placing him specifically proved to be a bit of a challenge. On one hand, Ned has shown without a doubt the most generosity and kindness out of anyone in the show. He's always happy to help Homer and the gang with whatever they need, even if it's at his own expense. From letting everyone use his bomb shelter during a supposed comet falling from the sky, even down to insisting that he himself leave when it becomes too overcrowded, Ned is as self-sacrificial as they come.
I want you to shoot Daddy if he tries to get back in.
He's also deeply caring towards others. In one episode, he takes the Simpsons kids under his roof as a foster parent and shows great patience and attentiveness with them, especially little Maggie. And we can't ignore his care for his family, who he cherishes deeply even well into adulthood. In the aforementioned episode where Ned loses his eyes, he's still accepting of his boys despite their alternative lifestyles. That said, while Ned is genuinely an amazing person, he's also flawed. He's been shown to have a bit of a superiority complex in the later seasons and can be envious when someone else is viewed as the good guy of Springfield. And while he does have an incredibly long fuse, when he finally does lose his temper, his roasts will cause more devastation than a full-on hurricane.
You ugly, hate-filled man.
Hey, I may be ugly and hate-filled, but what was the third thing you said?
Finally, his overzealous nature in regards to Christianity is a little much sometimes, mainly when it comes to forcing his beliefs onto others. This usually doesn't get too bad, but in one episode when Todd expresses doubt in his faith due to his grief over Maude, Flanders sends him away to live with the Simpsons, punishing him instead of helping process his grief. It just goes to show that even the best people have their worst moments, but thankfully, these slip-ups are few and far between for Ned. The fact is that he's as forgiving and friendly of a guy as they come, and his kind-hearted golden rule mentality earns him a high spot on our list. Up next, we have Springfield's favorite medical practitioner, Dr. Hibbert. With that wholesome, infectious laugh you hear pretty much anytime he appears,
I'll throw myself out.
how could Dr. Hibbert not be a good guy? He's never shy to provide care for the people of Springfield, and you can bet he'll have a lollipop to spare when the need arises. The worst we could say about him is that while he's a highly legitimate and caring doctor, he sometimes implies some shady medical practices. For example, one time he offered Marge free prescriptions in return for her real estate advice. But honestly, with how expensive healthcare in the US is, I'm personally not going to fault him much for that. If the FBI's watching though, that was a joke. Now we finally move to Ned's dearly departed wife, Maude Flanders. Like her husband and sons, Maude is basically the essence of a good Christian. She's kind, generous, and does her best to support both her family and the local community, and throughout her whole life proved that she'd basically never hurt a fly. That said, emphasis on throughout her whole life. In the season 29 finale, Flanders' Ladder, her ghost visits Bart in a coma and reveals that she actually wants vengeance on Homer, who she sees as being responsible for her death, which, frankly, isn't a ridiculous conclusion.
Power of Homer sucks compels you.
We're not going to pretend that being angry at someone for literally killing you isn't valid, and the episode was kind of uncertain about whether the ending was a dream or not, but considering that Maude presumably went to heaven, you'd think she'd have plenty of good things to focus on instead. That vindictiveness, while understandable, makes her our lowest character so far. Next up, we have the purest of the Simpson family, Maggie Simpson. Normally, just being a baby would be enough to give Maggie a high spot on our list, but due to a certain football head-shaped world dominator baby in training, we have to clarify why Maggie is this high. While Maggie can cause chaos in Springfield, most notably when she shot Mr. Burns, she's usually a force of pure good who just happens to have a few too many deadly weapons within reach. As for her good deeds, she saved Homer and Bart from Russ Cargill in the Simpsons movie by crushing the ladder with a loose boulder, and of course we can't forget her being willing to give Mr. Burns his childhood teddy bear back, even though she very well could have kept it, as we saw from their legendary tug-of-war match. Maggie is a national treasure, and we'd say she must be protected at all costs, but I'm starting to think she's got that covered. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree either, because next up is Marge Simpson. As Homer's devoted wife, Marge is certainly the better half of the two. She's smarter, more disciplined, and even stronger than her husband, and she uses those traits to tirelessly work for the good of her family. Whether it's cleaning up their messes or just smacking a spider Homer saw in his car keys,
You did the right thing by telling me. Shoot, get out of here.
Marge is pretty much entirely characterized by her deep maternal love for her family, and to be clear, we mean that as a compliment. However, that's not to say that Marge is without her flaws. While she's typically devoted to supporting her family, when she is given a position of power, influence, or status, she can often go off the deep end. This can go from being a bit snooty when she's invited to join a country club in scenes from the class struggle in Springfield, to abusing her authority and power in episodes like The Strong Arms of the Maw, which has an infamous joke where Marge forces herself onto Homer.
I wasn't asking.
While it's not enough to outweigh her good traits, and by and large, she's still way more caring and forgiving of a person than she needs to be, Marge loses some points for those blatant flaws in her character. We'd love to put her higher, but seriously, that joke loses her a lot of points. Like, what the heck was that, man?
Got a competition tomorrow. I could use a good luck snuggle.
Next, we have Springfield Elementary's less prominent nerd character, Martin Prince. While he's hardly a main character, Martin's few appearances paint him as, albeit socially inept, a pretty decent kid all around. He follows the rules to a T and tries to get his classmates to do the same, but if the season 2 episode Bart gets an F was anything to go by, the poor guy really just wants friends more than anything else. He was even willing to help Bart learn how to properly study in exchange for advice on how to be cool, though once he temporarily did, he sort of flaked on Bart. We'll have to dock him some points for that. Speaking of Springfield Elementary, next we have Bart's new teacher, Miss Peyton. While we haven't seen all that much of her yet, she's made a few appearances since her debut in season 33, in which she saved Bart from drowning in a swimming pool. Saving a kid's life is worth some big points, as is her genuine effort to be as good a teacher as possible. Now it's time to talk about one of my personal favorite recurring characters, Hans Mole Man. Despite the self-described agonizing pain in which he lives every day, Mole Man is one of the most genuinely decent people in Springfield.
Oh, thank goodness, rescue dogs.
This guy has some of the worst luck imaginable. Despite his appearance, he's only 31 years old. Later in the show, it's revealed that he was actually mutated by one of the many bits of radioactive material Homer's tossed out over the years. But despite his poor luck, he's still always willing to help out around town, whether it's running his iconic Mole Man in the Morning radio show or dressing as Bart to fill the void in the Simpson household, which shows that he doesn't hold a grudge against Homer. Even when Mole Man gets angry, it's not exactly unjustified. The only time he's maliciously acted towards another person was this one deleted scene scene where he robs God at gunpoint, and like, it's not like God is gonna get hurt by a gunshot wound anyway. Mole Man was just chasing that bag, and even those of us who are Christians won't blame him for that.
Now hand over the rest of it.
Well, there's also the fact that there's a race of earthquake-creating mole people living under Springfield who look very suspiciously like Mole Man. Were he not, though, we're sure Mole Man wouldn't maliciously cause a natural disaster, and even if he would, he'd probably be way too unlucky to pull it off. Following Mole Man is the only guy whose bad luck might rival even his, Bumblebee Man. A recurring gag character, he's the star of a Spanish TV show where he's constantly on the wrong end of some hilarious slapstick comedy. It's later revealed in the episode, 22 Short Films About Springfield, that he has a wife and a pet chihuahua, which really recontextualizes his work. What we saw once as a goofball hamming it up for a TV show, we now see as a clumsy, stressed out man who's using his admittedly unconventional gifts to provide for his family, even if his wife divorced him as soon as she was introduced. No es bueno indeed, Bumblebee Man. But don't worry, tu es bueno. Never change, except maybe a little less of that self-destructive clumsiness, just for your own good. Next is a man who needs no introduction. He's Duffman!
Duffman knows it's always time for a refreshing dive.
Well, okay, despite his pretty iconic voice and character design, Duffman is less of a character and more of a way of life. There really isn't much to say about Duffman, but if you're ever in need of a beer, you can count on him to help you out. But while he's a nice and well-meaning guy, there are a lot of alcoholics in Springfield, so his line of work might not be doing as much good as he'd like you to believe. Sharing the next spot are Homer's buddies, Wendy and Carl. While neither of them have gotten a ton of focus in the series, their friendship with each other and the community are enough to place them squarely in the good section of our list. There really isn't much to say about these two, save for the fact that they're loyal friends who generally treat others and each other well. They're good people, especially Lenny. Why else would Marge have a prayer shrine to him? I'm just so glad he's okay. Next up, we're giving Homer's half-brother, Herb Powell, a quick mention. While he only appears in a couple of episodes, we see enough of Herb to conclude that he's actually a super nice guy. They could have easily gone the Frank Grimes route of making him resentful of his more slobby brother, but even after Homer completely bankrupts him with his over-the-top car idea, Herb forgives him and still treats him with dignity and respect. We hope he's doing well these days. Maybe in the Simpsons universe he has a TV sitcom of his own.
Disco Stew is stepping into the next spot.
He's one of the most minor supporting characters of the bunch, not really having much of a fleshed out character even compared to the other gag characters. Nonetheless, we still feel like he deserves a positive mention for the sheer friendliness he exudes every time he's on screen.
Disco Stew always gets down, baby.
He's a bit of a flirt, sure, but with an outfit like that, how could you not be? It's basically a public service at that point. Despite how some board games might describe him, Milhouse is the furthest thing from a dud. Bart's best friend is by far the nicer and less mischievous of the two, though he does usually go along with Bart's pranks and other schemes. Milhouse is really just a ride-or-die buddy who's someone you can count on to be there. He gets extra points for his loyalty to Bart, despite Bart not really doing much to warrant it, and sometimes doing plenty to have the opposite effect. Speaking of which, now this might be a little divisive, but we're returning to the Simpson family with a double entry. Lisa Simpson and Bart Simpson are next. Not sure if this is a hot take, but while Lisa is portrayed as the more moral and well-behaved of the two kids, these two are both equally flawed. Lisa, for all of her good morals, often comes across as hypocritical. She frequently forces her beliefs onto others and takes her activism way too far at times. In Lisa the Vegetarian, she ruins Homer's barbecue, something that he, along with the whole town, was looking forward to. And she knew it, and tries to antagonize Homer for serving meat.
I'm going to my room.
That's it. Go to your room.
We do feel for Lisa's desire to be both accepted and a genuinely good person, and to her credit, she's usually willing to turn around when she discovers she's wronged someone. Then there's Bart, who, while he's certainly worse behaved than Lisa, isn't any less of a good kid nor a flawed one. Bart is constantly pranking people, getting in all kinds of trouble that ranges from vandalism to shoplifting. Regardless, Bart is never genuinely out to harm anyone, and when he does, he'll do whatever he can to fix it. The most memorable example of this, in my opinion, is Marge Be Not Proud, where Bart disappoints Marge by stealing a violent video game, only for him to make up for it by getting a nice Christmas photo taken at the mall as a gift. He's also been shown to stand up for his family at times, like when he straight up threatened to beat one of Nelson's old goons if he didn't give Lisa her cupcakes back.
So give her back those cupcakes before I knock your block off.
Still, he can also be kind of a jerk, like when he abandoned Milhouse to be beaten senseless by Nelson during a race. If we had to place one above the other, we'd give Lisa just the slightest edge over Bart, but the way we see it, these are just two kinds of troubled, flawed, but ultimately well-meaning kids who deserve a spot in the good section even if it's on the lower end. He may have been gone for years, but Apu will always hold a special place in our hearts. Oh, he's not dead or anything, just kind of stopped existing. It's a shame too, Apu was a chill guy in general. Aside from being notoriously cheap even to the point of selling his customers expired meat, something that could really get someone sick, Apu is an honest guy who's just trying his best to take care of himself and his family. While obviously he has also lose some points for cheating on his wife, he immediately gains most of them back by being honest with her about what he'd done and working himself to the bone to win her back. Not that we're taking away from how terrible adultery is, but at least Apu had the decency to clean up his act, and that's something to be respected. Now we're returning to the staff of Springfield Elementary, starting with Miss Hoover. By far the less fleshed out of the series' two recurring teachers, Miss Hoover gains a slight upper hand against her colleague for the fact that she seems at least a little more concerned for her children. Sure, she's totally exhausted by her job, but who wouldn't be? At the end of the day, she shows up and does her best to give the kids an education, though maybe she could stand to stop smoking so much on the job. The same could be said for Edna Krabappel. Edna had much more screen time than Miss Hoover before the passing of her voice actress Marsha Wallace, rest in peace. She was always much more nonchalant than her colleagues, preferring to drink and smoke in class rather than do much in the way of teaching or connecting with her students.
Bart, it's such a nice day today. Let's have detention outside.
But we still place her in the good category for the episode Bart Gets an F, in which she drops her usual cold demeanor when she sees Bart crying over failing his test. Seeing that he did actually try, she decides to give him extra credit so that he won't be held back a grade, proving that when it matters most, she can be the guiding hand her students need. Up next is the lovable inventor of the steamed hams, Principal Skinner. Similar to Edna, Skinner is usually a total stick in the mud. He enjoys getting the kids into trouble and takes his job pretty seriously. This goes directly in contrast to his personal life, where he's frankly a total wuss who, despite being in his 40s, allows himself to be bullied around by his horrible mother.
Why couldn't you have died instead of the car?
To Skinner's credit, he does genuinely care about Edna and his students, even if the latter still push him around pretty consistently. He wants to make Springfield Elementary a safe place for the kids to learn, and while he's far from perfect, he's at least genuinely trying to do his job well. For our last fully good character, we have Waylon Smithers, taking the bottom spot in the good category. On his own, he's a decent enough man. He's polite, friendly, and sometimes even helps keep Mr. Burns from going too far off the deep end. But it's the fact that he's Mr. Burns' loyal lapdog that makes him such a morally questionable individual. He rarely questions Monty on anything and has been shown to be jealous of anyone else who receives his attention. We'd mentioned that he's madly in love with Mr. Burns, but we feel it's pretty darn obvious, even if it's downright inexplicable. On occasion, however, Smithers has stood up to Mr. Burns, most notably refusing to support his plan to block out the sun in Who Shot Mr. Burns. This shows that he's willing to stand up for what he believes in, even if it's at the risk of antagonizing his boss. That's enough, albeit barely, to keep him out of our next category. This is the gray area. Local pirate captain slash restaurateur Horatio McAllister is first up in this category. This scallywag is an illegitimate sea captain who owns a fried seafood restaurant clearly named the Frying Dutchman. He doesn't get much spotlight, but he's generally a nice guy, especially by pirate standards. That said, his habit of driving ships drunk can pose a pretty significant threat and loses him some points for recklessness.
I just heard there was gold in your belly.
But questionable morals aside, I would totally try his restaurant. Anyone else? The word sideshow brings a particular character to mind, but way before him, we have to talk about Sideshow Mel. Or, I mean, do we? Sideshow Mel's alright, but he's barely involved in the show at all. He's basically just Krusty's lackey, rarely standing up for himself and sometimes lamenting his position. Not a bad guy by any means, but he doesn't have any standout character traits from what we've seen either. He still deserves a reasonable spot for bringing quality entertainment to kids everywhere, or, well, at least entertainment. The local school bus driver Otto Man is up next. Geologists and DRG players will love this guy because he's both a rocker and a stoner. Now, inherently, there's not much wrong with that. There is something wrong, however, with reckless driving when you're a bus driver responsible for the lives of many children. Otto's a nice guy, but if he's gonna be in this line of work, he should probably get his recreational activities more under control. Again, especially while he's driving. While he is a fictional character in universe, Scratchy is gonna get a break when it comes to our list. Plenty of people of all ages grew up watching Tom and Jerry absolutely eviscerate each other, and as we got older, it was obvious that Jerry was usually the one who provoked Tom rather than the other way around. The same goes for Itchy and Scratchy, and while we have nothing profound to say about his morality, Scratchy is a decent enough cat who certainly doesn't deserve the amount of literal body horror Itchy puts him through. Oh, and on that note, we can't forget about Poochie, the radical skater dog who briefly joined Itchy and Scratchy. He may have failed to keep the fans' interest, but Poochie was always there when his home planet needed him. Too bad he died on the way back there, huh? The town drunk, or one of them at least, Barney Grumble is up next. His severe alcoholism is pretty much the reason he's so low on our list, and simultaneously the reason why he's not any lower. Addiction is a seriously tragic illness to grapple with, and while Barney has attempted to get sober before, it sadly didn't last.
My name is Barney, and I'm an alcoholic.
This is a Girl Scout meeting.
Sure, his drunken stumbling is funny sometimes, but when you think about it, it's more sad than anything. He's still a decent friend, though, even if his condition makes him far from the most reliable one. If nothing else, he's never out to hurt anybody. Still Still, the gluttony sinner medal couldn't possibly go to anyone else when this guy's in the running. Next up is the patriarch of the Simpsons family, Abe Simpson. While he's not a saint, Grandpa Simpson is decent enough of a guy despite his negativity. Many of Homer's worst characteristics were sadly passed down by Abe, from his alcoholism to his tendency to neglect his children.
You're a good eater today, Maggie.
That said, while Abe was far from a model parent to Homer, he at least did his best as a single parent after Mona left the family, and he genuinely loves his grandkids too. In general, Abe is always there when the family needs him, even if the contrary isn't always true, at least where Homer is concerned. By and large, he just wishes his family would visit him more often, so while Abe is not perfect, he's a decent man who's just looking for companionship. Right after Abe, we have Mona Simpson, aka Homer's biological mother. She left the family when he was just 9 years old, and while that sounds like a surefire ticket to the bad category, we'll give her at least a little leeway considering the fact that Mr. Burns was after her. Mona was protesting his despicable business practices, and as a result became the target of a very serious threat of legal prosecution. She left to save herself, and possibly in part Homer, due to the danger that her staying would have put him in. But while much of her story is sympathetic, we can't fully excuse the fact that she prioritized social activism over being there for her son. Mona had good intentions, but they ended up deeply hurting her son by the end of the day, so we feel like she's just fine where she is on our list. Coincidentally, our next character is also one of the many deceased ones from the series, Bleeding Gums Murphy. Okay, sure, he's nowhere near as impactful as Mona, but his rapport with Lisa during his final weeks was sweet nonetheless. As a fellow musician and Lisa's role model, he encouraged her gift for music and even gave her his saxophone as a parting gift. So why is he this low? Well, Murphy learned jazz from a musician named Blind Willie Witherspoon, who passed his saxophone down to Murphy, which turned out to be an umbrella. For decades, Murphy let this man, who taught him everything he knew about jazz, believe he was a failure as a musician, even when he was playing an umbrella the whole time. There's no deep reason for it either. Murphy straight up admits with a smile that he thought it was funny.
We all thought it was funny.
His sheer lack of remorse for this loses him a lot of points. From a lack of remorse to a smack of divorce. Next we have Milhouse's parents, Kirk and Luann Van Houten. While they get nowhere near as much focus in the series as their son, we have enough screen time of these two to conclude that they're rocky on their best days and downright toxic on their worst.
You want me to show this to the cat and have the cat tell you what it is?
Neither of them are great with Milhouse either, given how Luann basically ignores him while Kirk basically uses him to try and regain her favor. We can only hope the second round of their marriage is at least a little better than the first. Marge's mother, Jacqueline Bouvier, doesn't get a lot of time to shine throughout the series. When she does, it's usually in a negative light. In the episode Moaning Lisa, she was revealed to encourage Marge to smile through her depression, not so Marge would feel better, but so the world would see just how good of a mother she herself was.
Take all your bad feelings and push them down.
How ironic that we're placing her here, right? She also shares some of Patty and Selma's resentment of Homer, and while it's nowhere near as harsh from her, it's still certainly there. While Miss Bouvier is not a pleasant person, she's not malicious, and at the end of the day, she does genuinely love her kids. There isn't much positive to say about her, but there's simply not enough negativity to place her any lower. Perhaps the closest thing to a true neutral character in Springfield, next is Gil Gunderson. Like Mole Man before him, Gil is mainly there just to be a punching bag for whatever life has to throw at him. He's just nowhere near as funny as Mole Man is, nor as outwardly friendly. Gil is just a guy trying to make it through life one day at a time, so we feel comfiest putting him right near the middle of our list. Next is another minor character, Professor Frink. We wouldn't exactly call him a mad scientist per se, but he isn't exactly a sane one either. What with the toying with the fabric of time and the tendency to make problems worse and the yay. But at least he's trying to help, which is more than you can say for some Springfieldians. Up next, we have Superintendent Chalmers, Skinner's no-nonsense boss. Chalmers might just be the closest thing to a totally sane person in Springfield. Sure, he's rough around the edges, but at the end of the day, he's just a very stern man who takes his job seriously. While he's not exactly nice, he does care about keeping the school in order and wants the kids to be enthusiastic about learning. He's no role model, but he's a functioning member of society, and as low of a bar as that is, we've got to give credit where the context permits it. A certain slack-jawed yokel, Cletus Spuckler, is next. True to the hillbilly stereotype, Cletus is as dense as he is friendly.
This avocado just gave me a wedding ring.
Thankfully, he's pretty friendly. As messy of a guy as he is, he's not malicious nor mean most of the time, just a little too true to his character design. Oh yeah, he's also married to his sister. Kinda why he's so low on the list, but whatever. You may think a bully would belong in the bad category by default, but Nelson Muntz says a big ha ha to anyone who thought he'd end up there. While he is a bully, which by default loses him some points, Nelson proves pretty quickly that he's not all bad. For every scene of him brutally beating up one of the wimpier kids, there's another where he almost uncharacteristically protects them from a bigger threat. On top of his occasional good deeds, we really do feel bad for Nelson, given his struggle of not having remotely decent parents, nor even really any friends. It's not hard to see why he's so darn mean all the time.
Savor it! Let the flavors dance on your palate!
But when he does make a friend, like Bart or Martin, he's not unwilling to protect them from being harmed by anyone other than him. Oh, I mean, Martin? Who's Martin? They never hang out. Now it's finally time to talk about the main character himself, Homer Simpson, the lover of donuts, the planter of powers, and most importantly, the Simpson. While his character has declined in recent years, it's worth remembering that Homer was actually a fairly decent guy in the earlier seasons of the show. Sure, he's always been lazy, underachieving, and rather selfish, but there's always been the underlying sense of Homer genuinely loving and caring for his family, even though he screws up here and there. This is especially evident in the first few seasons of the show. Among other deeds, Homer stopped Bart from a deadly daredevil challenge, sacrificed the chance to buy an AC unit for his family to give Lisa her saxophone, worked 2 jobs at once to buy her a pony and pay for its maintenance, has revealed that Maggie is his motivation to work at all, and, most evidently, in one early episode, he attempts to end his own life so his family can collect insurance money when they're down on their luck. We're not saying Homer was ever a model citizen or even family man, but he genuinely cares about his family more than anything else.
Does a wife know things?
Yes.
Which is why it's a shame that we can't end the entry here. Homer is also an alcoholic, an often neglectful husband and father, occasionally strangles his young son, and has a notoriously short temper. These traits are even all amplified in later seasons, and while he's never quite reached Peter Griffin levels of bad parenting, never even approached it, honestly, he's definitely got some issues that have sadly grown worse over the years. Nonetheless, Homer at least tries to make up for his worst moments and genuinely does love his family, which is enough to give him a lower, neutral spot than rather an outright bad one. Man, we just know Frank Grimes would be rolling over in his grave. We were a bit harsh on old Grimey in our original good to evil ranking of Springfield's citizens. In all fairness, Frank did live an honest life where he tried his best to work hard and be successful. In a true satire of American working culture, however, Frank remained down on his luck and unfulfilled, as so many do, whereas Homer, despite being objectively less qualified and more incompetent, had all the things that Frank Grimes wished he had and then some.
Because from now on, we're enemies.
Do I have to do anything?
We don't blame Frank for being jealous, nor even a bit resentful. It's the fact that he started trying to sabotage Homer out of said resentment that lands him lower. He certainly didn't deserve death, but, well, you literally did it to yourself, man. Let this be a lesson, kids. All work and no play might just make you grimy. He may not have a very respectable spot, but he does have the Envy Sinner Medal to enjoy up there in heaven, or, wherever he is. I don't know what the guy believes in.
Change the channel, Mart.
That's our Homer!
Speaking of being made bitter by lack of fulfillment, that's Mo Sislak's bread and butter. Much like our last entry, we were way too hard on poor Mo last time around. Sure, he's not a model citizen. He's threatened to shoot people multiple times, killed the original Alfalfa in Little Rascals for stealing his bit, and has multiple counts of sexual harassment against him. Okay, he's really not a model citizen, and that last trait easily earns him the Lust Sinner Medal, but he's got his good traits. Mo has a soft spot for babies and children. We see this in the episode Mo Baby Blues, where he bonds with Maggie after catching her stops him from taking his own life. He's also a decent friend, and has even been shown to genuinely improve himself when he gets into healthy relationships.
You have not been treating your wives the way they deserve.
All of which inevitably fail, but the effort is certainly there. Mo might be a jerk most of the time, but he's not a fundamentally bad guy. He's just desperate for human connection and doesn't know how to go about it in a way that doesn't involve criminal activity. We still can't fully excuse that though, sorry Mo. Yeehaw! Grab your pistols, cause next up is Richard Texan. If there's something to be celebrated, you can bet this gun-toting goofball will be ready with pistols to fire like it's the start of a track meet. As for why he's so low, I mean, look man, you really gotta be careful where you aim those things. They aren't toys, however much you treat them as such. Still, despite the usual persona of rich businessmen in cartoons, Rich isn't necessarily evil. Selfish and reckless? Absolutely, but evil? Not quite, but we're certainly getting there. You guys might remember Troy McClure for starring in such films as Lead Paint, Delicious but Deadly, and Here Comes the Metric System. He's an actor who can do it all, well, except be a devoted family man. He marries Selma in the episode A Fish Called Selma, and does so primarily just for public relations. He's ultimately willing to bring a child into the world just to improve his own image, which is a pretty sleazy move. Even Selma wasn't down for it, and spoilers, she's not all that nice either. But we will give Troy McClure the Pride Sinner Medal for his ego. And for the grand finale of the gray area, this list wouldn't be complete without Grand Skipper Willie. While he's not the most complex character, Willie is as hilarious as he is aggressive. For every time he's shown his violent, aggressive temper, there's another where he's more than willing to protect the school and its students from whatever threats come towards them.
There's a dog running around in the air ducts.
Willie is pure chaos as a character, and while he's not a bad dude, he's one you might like to keep at arm's length. He really is the perfect character to close out our gray area. Now, it's time for the characters who would make you say boo, or at least boo earns. These characters are the bad to evil. Kicking off this category, and probably some nerds, are Nelson's bullying companions, Kearney, Dolph, and Jimbo. What places them so much lower than the most iconic bully of the series is the simple fact that they are much older. Okay, not like 40 or something. They're all teenagers, with the oldest, Kearney, being 19. We likely don't need to tell you that it's very wrong, not to mention creepy, for them to be bullying kids so much younger than themselves. They also lack the good traits Nelson has, which cements their low position. They aren't any lower, though, because they're still young and could definitely change for the better later on, but for now, they've earned their position here.
Who wants their lunch money back?
Leaning more into the more dramatic aspects of the show, next up is Artie Ziff. He was Homer's romance rival in high school, as both of them were pining over Marge. While Marge initially went to prom with Artie, his pushiness turned her off, but rather than working on himself or anything crazy like that, Artie remained obsessed with Marge to the point where he recreated their prom night so he could force a kiss onto her.
If Marge marries Artie, I'll never be born.
To his credit, he does apologize, but his unhealthy fixation on Marge, despite her clear disinterest and, marriage, is a big issue he needs to correct. It's sad to see that he hasn't improved in terms of his obsession nor his pushiness. Just move on, dude. While he's far from the worst character ever, Comic Book Guy has still earned a low spot on our list. He's one of the few in the bottom category to not be a violent criminal, which is good, obviously, but he makes up for that with his genuine meanness to everyone around him.
Out of my way, League of Non-Legends.
The guy is a stereotypical neckbeard, always having something negative to say to try and bring down the mood of everyone around him. There's also the fact that he cons people frequently at his store, even kids. He might not be a criminal, but he's certainly a jerk. Don't let their last name fool you. Reverend Lovejoy and Helen Lovejoy are far from loving, joyful people. Like Comic Book Guy, they're not exactly criminals, just jerks who use their positions to get what they want. They're selfish, condescending, and rude, but not outright evil. That said, we place him lower than Comic Book Guy because he at least wears his jerkiness with pride. These two are supposed to be Christians, but they're the furthest thing from old Nettie. Hey! Everyone's favorite alcoholic children's entertainer, Krusty the Clown, is up next. His goofy personality might make him seem like a delight, but Krusty can be a real jerk at times. He mistreats his employees and doesn't appreciate them nor his fans as much as he ought to. He's also a total sellout with an ego that's way better than it ought to be. That said, if nothing else, Krusty does at least have some of his moral fibers intact. He appreciates Bart and Lisa's work to help him out here and there, and does his best to connect with his estranged daughter, Sophie.
That's my hero.
Always will be.
Krusty is still self-absorbed and miserable, but at least he's got some good in him. Alright boys, let's start booking some of the real criminals, like Chief Wiggum? Well, I can see why he's this low at least. He's got to be the most incompetent cop in cartoon history. Despite his effort to protect Springfield, he's negligent at best and downright detrimental at worst. Actually, hot take, the Darwin Sinner Medal goes to Chief Wiggum. Sure, Ralph is objectively dumber, but he's a kid who's inhaled too much glue and tar fumes. You're the chief of police, dude, and you don't know that saying over after a radio call doesn't mean the crime itself is over?
Oh, well, thank God that's over. I was worried there for a second.
While Chief Wiggum is a terrible police officer, we're giving him some slack because he at least usually means well. It's not enough to save him from the bad category, but if we had to say something actually good about him, he does love his son Ralph. Any interaction between these two makes it clear that Ralphie is his dad's whole world. Heck, he loves him so much that in the future he made a cloning machine for him so the world would never be without Ralph. While Chief Wiggum is a horrible cop, in the realm of fatherhood, he at least finds some redemption for that infamous incompetence of his. That's more than we can say for reporter Kent Brockman. We still aren't quite in jailable territory yet, but Kent is one of the most unsympathetic characters in the entire series. He doesn't care one bit about making the world a better place, nor even giving the truth for any given situation. He's just there to get a paycheck, however sketchy he has to be to get it. Next up is another Umbrella entry, and given that it's Patty and Selma, I don't think anyone's going to be too mad about us ranking them together. Any points they would get from their love for each other, and in Selma's case refusing to bring a child into her loveless marriage with Troy McClure, are immediately taken away way by their treatment of those around them. These two are unbearably mean and miserable, showing callousness to others at best and outright cruelty at worst. Homer is basically their favorite target, whether they're basically enslaving him under the threat of exposing an IOU to Marge or straight up trying to kill him during what was already a suicide attempt. These two go beyond your average disapproving step-siblings and into full-on Homer-side territory. Now, we would love to give Herman some credit for his help with Bart planning a counterattack on his school bully Nelson, even if he did take things a little too seriously, but Herman takes the con artistry of comic book guy and tacks on a bit of extra criminal activity. He's more than willing to hold Homer hostage when the latter discovers his counterfeit genes operation, and basically shows no remorse for his crimes. Now, while he is a pretty scummy guy, there are definitely worse crimes to commit than making cruddy pants. Next, we have a lawyer you'd better not call Lionel Hutz. He is the spitting image of an unethical lawyer. Sure, he's outwardly friendly and seems altruistic, but don't be fooled. Hutz is in this for the money, and only the money. He even encourages his clients to directly lie or exaggerate their cases to get more of a payout.
Wrong! You are not fine! You are in constant pain!
You could argue it's just part of his job, to which I'll argue, fair, but repeatedly running over the judge's son definitely is not. That said, it's still almost better than how Agnes Skinner treats her own son. Agnes is every negative mother stereotype rolled into one. She's a helicopter parent to Seymour, her adult son, constantly berates and abuses him and controls his life to a downright toxic degree.
Your draft number was too high. The suspense was killing me.
Their banter might be hilarious, but we definitely wouldn't blame Seymour if he ended up plopping her into a nursing home. We won't even give her credit for raising him since, by Seymour's insistence, she insists on being repaid for all the food he ate as a child. Probably weren't even any steamed hams. Landing just outside of the top 10 is Springfield's other, cheaper, much less ethical doctor. Hi everybody, it's Dr. Nick Riviera. Sure, with healthcare prices like those in the USA, you wouldn't be blamed for jumping for joy at the idea of a discount surgery clinic. Desperate times call for desperate measures after all. That said, from Nick's perspective, he is actively putting his patients' lives in the balance just to drum up business.
How many opioids would you like?
Unlike Dr. Hibbert, he's neither intelligent nor disciplined in his practices, and the only reason he's not even lower is because he's the final character on our list who isn't outright maliciously evil. At number 10, we have a character who's been around since the first episode, Les Moore. He was Santa's Little Helper's original owner, and when the little guy lost one too many times, Les threw him out onto the streets, effectively abandoning him. That alone is enough to land him a low spot, but when Santa's Little Helper becomes Duffman's sidekick for a time later in the series, Les jumps at the opportunity to reclaim his dog just for the money and fame. Lawful evil in its purest form. Les Moore isn't necessarily breaking any laws, but he breaks the heart of a cute dog, and at the end of the day, isn't that worse? Next, we have Springfield's notorious serial criminal, Snake Jailbird. He's seen robbing people at gunpoint repeatedly throughout the series, and he never once seems to even try to improve as a person. Well, actually, that's wrong. He was willing to try relationship therapy with Apu to improve their robbing life, after all. And unlike our last entry, he's actually nice to animals, sometimes. When he stole this puppy from Bart and Lisa, his evil scheme was simply to love and cherish it. Man, if only he didn't have so many other crimes, he'd earn a lot more points for that, but sadly, that's the only upper hand he has on the last character. The mayor of Springfield, Mayor Quimby, is up next. He's every negative politician stereotype rolled up into one. From using taxpayers' money to commission murders to having multitudes of sex scandals, Mayor Quimby does it all. And we mean that in the worst way.
Thanks for giving me an 8:30 appointment. You are a lifesaver.
It'd be nice if I could say something good about him to kind of balance that out, but the only good trait this guy has is that the rest of the list is much worse. For example, next we have characters so diabolical they're downright inhuman. Literally, Kang and Kodos appear almost exclusively in the Treehouse of Horror episodes, but you're crazy if you think we'd leave them out this time. They initially seemed nice and hospitable, but that was until Lisa discovered what she thought was their plan to cook and eat the Simpson family.
Initiate fertilization procedure.
Regrettably, this understandable doubt was all the pair needed to hold a grudge against humanity for so long that they'd still be trying to torture and enslave them decades later. Thanks a lot, Lisa. Just outside of the bottom 5 is technically the series' first ever villain, the babysitter bandit from the pilot episode. You might remember her from that one weirdly well-animated clip that circulated the internet a few years ago. True to her name, she's a serial thief who's not above tying up and even potentially harming children.
I hope you're smart enough to keep your mouth shut.
He isn't.
If she weren't the final character with only one major appearance, we feel she'd be even lower. But for right now, the final 5 are just even worse. At number 5, we have the local mob boss, Fat Tony. If Snake is the king of crime in Springfield, Fat Tony is the guy behind the curtain who's really pulling all the strings. He commits his crimes in secret and is therefore a much bigger and harder to defeat threat. His kill count is probably one of the highest in the entire series, and he doesn't exactly have any sympathetic motivations. He does occasionally show a sensitive side, but these moments are rare and never enough to take away from how ruthless he is. This time around, our former gold medalist of evil, Sideshow Bob, misses out on the podium. No, it's not because of any redemptive qualities we found in him, rather, it's because the last three are just that bad. But that's not to say Sideshow Bob isn't still a force to be reckoned with. As if framing his longtime co-star for murder wasn't bad enough, devoting his whole life to murdering a child is a whole new level of messed up.
It's an ICBM. I commit Bart's murder.
Heck, he's even tried to destroy the entirety of Springfield with a bomb. The guy's pretty much pure evil. Even his few moments of humanity, like trying to start anew with his family and even saving Bart on one occasion, are undone by his consistent desire to kill a little boy out of revenge. But as bad as Sideshow Bob is, he's nowhere near as evil as our bronze medalist of evil, the diabolical Mr. Burns. Greedy, sadistic, and just plain soulless, Mr. Burns is truly evil incarnate. Think Mr. Krabs from SpongeBob, but with all of his good traits stripped away, and all of his bad ones made even worse. That's Monty Burns, baby! Any attempts to humanize Burns, although existent, don't do much for him. They tend to be undone by his other actions in the same episode. I can think of no better example than this one scene where Burns tearfully asks Smithers if his power plant was what killed the ducks he's hearing about. When Smithers confirms it for him, it's revealed that Burns was crying out of joy, and that's one of his less egregious sins. Let's not forget that this guy tried to block out the sun just so he could form a monopoly on light itself. He's no doubt earned the Greed Sinner Medal, because if there's money to be made, Burns will go for it, no matter how unethical. Even his attempts to reform, like in the episode The Old Man and the Lisa, end with him slipping back into his old ways. So while he's a great antagonist, Burns is pure evil without a doubt.
You're still evil, and when you're trying to be good, you're even more evil.
The silver medal of evil goes to Scratchy's much worse half, Itchy. As the Jerry to Scratchy's Tom, Itchy is an absolute menace. Like, honestly, do we even need to explain this decision? He absolutely eviscerates Scratchy in so many horrible ways, from blowing him up, to carving him up, to even straight up killing his family. We were tempted to give Sideshow Bob the Wrath Medal, but Itchy deserves it more. The one thing we really need to explain, though, is why he's not number one. And while we definitely have enough to put him there, and the thought crossed our minds, there is the vague possibility that it's all for the cameras. It has been implied that Itchy and Scratchy are pretty good friends and have even worked together here and there. The mouse is still an absolute sadistic psychopath, but, you know, I'm not even sure how I was planning to finish that sentence. What I am sure of, though, is that the gold medal of evil has to go to Russ Cargill, head of the Environmental Protection Agency and main villain of the Simpsons movie. You'd think an organization like EPA would be a good thing, but when a guy as sinister as Russ is at the head of it, no amount of good intentions redeems it. This guy is, like, pure evil. He knows it, he owns it, and he's not even particularly proud of it. He just is. He not only trapped the entirety of Springfield under a giant dome, totally not just because he's connected to the company that made it.
I do own the company that makes the dome, but that's beside the point.
But the moment Springfield tried to escape, he literally tried to blow up the entire city. This guy had no problem blowing up thousands of people for pretty much no reason. It's one thing to do bad things for a shoddy reason. Mr. Burns is corrupt and callous for the sake of money, and Itchy is sadistic for the sake of his show with Scratchy, but despite his organization's name, Russ just abuses his power to domineer others, and the moment he's faced with any inconvenience, resorts to manipulating the freaking president into unknowingly signing off on the idea of silencing his enemies via death. Even after he was foiled, Russ was still mad enough to try and kill Bart and Homer, showing that, when all else fails, murder will still be on this psycho's mind.